Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. So continuing on, we talked about the dangers of quoting hadiths. So that's pretty clear. Now we're going to talk about our methodology of selection. So which methodology have we used to select the hadith that we're actually going to study in this class? Remember, we have to have a methodology. Everyone has a methodology, regardless of whether they declare it or whether they explain it or they don't. It's important to have a methodology. So our methodology is going to be, number one, we're going to try all of these points. We're going to try to focus on all of these points. Number one, straightforwardness. So we're going to try to focus on statements of the Prophet or hadiths which are very straightforward in nature. So what does straightforward mean? It means that it's pretty clear when you simply just read the hadith what the meaning is. If you read it in Arabic or you read it in English, it's pretty clear. Why? Because there are some hadiths which are very, they're a little bit difficult to understand. You need a lot of background knowledge. You need a lot of kind of understanding of the context. You need a lot of different things. The reason why we're going to focus on things which are straightforward is because this is actually an introductory class to hadith. So we're not going to get into the really difficult ones that where you could kind of, read like 10 pages of commentary on them or something like that. We're going to try to focus on the one which are pretty clear. Now, why do I say pretty clear? That's because a lot of times people think that all hadith are just completely clear and they don't require too much explanation. And sometimes people say, if only we have the Arabic language, I'm sure you've heard this, if only we knew Arabic, then everything would just be clear. The Quran would be clear, and the hadith would be clear, and we actually don't even need a class actually. We don't need commentary. We don't want to know what some other human being had to say. We want to know only what the Prophet said and what Allah said, and if we know Arabic, then we're going to be perfectly fine. Right? So I want to do a quick exercise with you, and you have to be honest though. You have to be very honest for this exercise to work. It seems like we're missing like half the people or something that we had before break time. But that's fine. Inshallah, the exercise will still work. How many of you are fluent, generally fluent in the Arabic language? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, from the people who raised their hand, I'm going to quote a hadith here for you. Tell me if you've ever heard this hadith before in your life. Okay, or if you've ever heard it or if you've ever studied it before in your life. The hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, La adwa, wa la tiyara, wa la hama, wa la safar. Any of the Arabic speakers, they heard this in their life? Studied it or anything like that? No. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. Now, can anyone who knows Arabic, who's fluent in Arabic, explain to me what this means? La adwa, wa la tiyara, wala hamma, wala safar. All Arabic words. Very simple. Four main Arabic words with las in front of them. La means no. Very easy. Right? Can anyone explain to me one or two, or just even one? Can explain to me one of these things? It's authentic hadith. It's very short. Can someone explain to me what it means? Who knows? Yes, go ahead. You studied or no? Okay, bismillah, go. Talking about different kind of races? It's a good guess. Not at all close, but it was a good, at least you tried. At least you tried. I'm not putting it down. At least you tried, alhamdulillah. Alright? Yes. Okay, one meaning, yes. Yes, mashallah. So we got one. Adwa is contagious. So la adwa means there is no contagion. No automatic contagion. What does that mean now? Right? There's a context. There's an understanding of what it's supposed to mean. You can't get it just because you know the Arabic language. You would have to know a lot more context in which it was said, what is the background, what are the other statements. Because when we see a disease, right? If you have the flu and you sneeze on someone else, that person is contaminated. Now the sneeze has transferred onto the other person. And the Prophet is saying, there is no adwa. There is no contagious illness. Is that what he meant? That's not what he meant. Okay, we're not going to study this hadith in our class anyways, but my point is, because it'll take a long time to explain. The point is, just because you know Arabic doesn't mean you know the context of this. One of these things is talking about a superstition that Arabs believed in, that they said when a person is hungry, you feel pangs of hunger in your stomach. So they thought that there's actually a serpent inside your stomach that's biting your stomach, and that's why you're feeling the pangs of hunger. So he's saying that's not true. Don't believe in this kind of superstition. Another one is talking about that people used to believe that if a lot of Americans believe this too for some reason. Like if someone has been killed unjustly and they've been murdered, then their soul kind of floats around the world, right? And it's like looking for until vengeance has been, established. We got the killer or something like that. The person just floats around, and they believe that the soul is in an owl. And that owl kind of like goes around at nighttime or something like that, and they would think, oh look, that's the soul of the avenged and stuff like that. So that's what kind of these superstitions, these things. But the point is that just because we have the Arabic language doesn't mean it's necessarily straightforward. So hopefully that's a little bit clear, and hopefully that clarifies a little bit why we're teaching Arabic in the second year rather than the first year. We're going to focus on some of these subjects in the first year. So the point is that we're going to take a methodology which focuses on hadith which are straightforward. Now, we're talking about the time of the Prophet, right? So at that time, Arabic was very rich. A lot of things fell out of use, and they say, well, okay, fine, we can go ahead and we should focus on kind of Arabic from medieval times. Even Arabic in medieval times, if you pick up a book like Riyadus Salihin, which we talked about, Imam Nawawi, okay? It was written for the average person, the average Arab, living in his time. It's around 7th century. But still, there are several times where he has to define Arabic words and Arabic terms in a way because people didn't understand what they mean. So hopefully it's clear when we say straightforwardness, we're going to try our best that if someone had an average understanding of Arabic, which I'm not expecting you to have it, but it would be straightforward and clear to understand, where you don't need to go in depth. If someone read the Arabic or read the basic translation, they would kind of get the gist of the hadith without having to go in depth, but then we're going to extract lessons from that hadith, number one. Number two, usefulness in everyday life. So we're going to try to focus on those hadith which are generally useful to people. Right? So for example, I mentioned the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ ate chicken. Is it that useful? Is it that important for you? No, not necessarily. Because generally we understand that nothing is prohibited for you until it's specified. So the chicken is generally, you can eat it anyways, as long as the requirements and all that. So there's no point talking about, like hadith like this, which are not necessarily going to be that useful for us. Whereas they may have been useful for a group of people, or they may be useful for a specialist, not necessarily that useful. So we're going to try and focus on the hadith which are very useful for us. Number three, those which are comprehensive. Now, what does comprehensiveness mean? Meaning the comprehensiveness of topics. Right? So as I mentioned, we want to try and focus on different topics so that our understanding of Islam is kind of broad. We kind of have a understanding across the board. Now, the hadith we're going to talk about focus primarily on character and manners and morals and those kind of things. Why? Because you could kind of divide studying Islam into about three fields. One of them is we've been talking about in the previous class. One of them is like theology, which relates to beliefs, what you believe in and all of these things. The second is Islamic law or fiqh, right, or sharia. All those things which you're supposed to be kind of doing on a regular basis. And a subcategory within Islamic law or fiqh or sharia is akhlaq or character or behavior or something like that. So for the most part, we're going to take that as kind of a separate category, and we're going to focus just on that. Why? Because all the other hadiths which deal with beliefs, or all the other hadith which deal with Islamic law, will be covered in those two classes respectively. So that's hopefully a clear why we're doing that. Number three, we're going to try to focus on brevity. We're going to try to go on shorter hadiths which are not too long. One or two, maybe a little bit longer in nature, a few of them. But some hadith can go very long. They can go on for pages. And what we want to try to do is try and remember. We want to try and study these things so either we can memorize them and correctly quote hadiths in our society to change things, or we can at least remember the meaning, because if you get into like a 2-3 page thing, it's very difficult to recall the meaning unless you have it handy with you. And we're going to try to focus on authenticity. Now this is a very important note, is that the hadith have been preserved in such a way where there's different labelings and there's different categorizations, and I'm going to explain that in the next slide. But there is a time where you have to be very rigorous and very critical when it comes to authenticity, and there's a time when you can be a little bit more lax and you can be a little bit more relaxed. When are you allowed to, or when do you have to be very strict and very critical when it comes to hadith grading and criteria? Yes. Yes, okay. So things that we believe in Islam, and things have to do with halal and haram, meaning like Islamic law, things that we're prohibited from doing, the way we worship Allah, all of these things. So these are things which we need to be very, very careful. Now, when can we be lax? When can we kind of, relax the rules a little bit and say, it doesn't have to be that authentic? Yeah. Stories about a character or a character? About certain people? Okay, that's true, but that's not hadith then, right? Unless you mean the Prophet is telling a story about somebody else? Analogy, okay. Not necessarily analogies. Okay, anything else that falls outside of the two categories, that's right. So for example, when we're talking about akhlaq, behavior, etiquette, good character, you can be a little bit lax and you don't have to have such a strict criteria. That's why Imam Bukhari, as I mentioned, the other book called Al-Adab al-Mufrad, he puts in a little bit weaker hadith in that category. Why? Because he understood this division. He understood. Why did he understand that? Just to give you a hypothetical example. If somebody is saying that I heard the Prophet say that, you know what, you should, if you spend this much money or you spend wealth in the path of Allah, then you're going to get a special reward from Allah because of that charity. Now that's a general principle in Islam, right? If, perhaps the guy was mistaken or the guy didn't have a very good memory or something like that, how much damage is it going to have when you're actually in line with the general principle of Islam? It's not as much. So there's a criteria of a few criteria that you have to have when you're allowed to relax the circumstances. That's why the reason I'm mentioning this is because sometimes people, they go a little bit too hardcore. And they go like, you know what, if this is not at the level of the standard of Imam Bukhari, I'm never going to accept this statement. Even if it's something related to like smiling at your brother or something like that, which is highly authentic anyways. But let's just say if it was something else, it was something not that, there's another version of the hadith which talks about smiling at your brother, which is not at the same level of authenticity. You say, I'm not going to accept that one. First of all, the principle of smiling is fine. The principle of being nice and having good character is fine. The belief that you're going to be rewarded according to it is fine. So there's certain criteria where we can be lax when it comes to these things. So generally you should understand that. Just for the sake of acceptance, so you don't, because we have this kind of issue in society where many people don't get this, all of the hadiths which we're using in this class are completely authentic. They're not even at the level of being a little bit weak. They're all, verified by quite a few authorities to be authentic. Just to sidestep that, but you have to remember that that is not necessarily the criteria, and we're going to cover that in Prophetic Wisdom 2, which is a class which will be taught next year, inshallah. The way to study. So the way we're going to study is, we're going to do a number of things. We're going to start with the hadiths that we have in front of us. I'm going to read it in Arabic, and you're going to repeat it after me in Arabic. So that what you actually get, there's something known as isnad or sanad. Sanad is a chain of narration. And the way that it's been passed on is by two. One is by writing, that's one way, but the primary way in which it's been passed on is by repetition. So somebody hears something, and then they repeat it orally or verbally to the other person, and this chain continues and continues. And you find today that you still have many, of the top scholars in this field, they continue to transmit things verbally through hadith by saying the actual Arabic out loud. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to do that as a class, and we're going to, I'm going to say the Arabic. If you can't pronounce the Arabic, it's fine, skip that part. If you can pronounce it, you go ahead and do that, because what you're doing is you're going to get the fact that you have a source that you're saying this hadith, and this hadith has been heard from me because I said it to you, and this hadith has been heard from my teachers and my scholars, of which, there's something called a license, ijazah and all of that, which is going all the way back from people living all the way back to the Prophet. Now, we cannot keep track of your attendance and it's difficult because there's so many students and whether you pronounce it correctly or not. So we're not going to be issuing what's called ijaza or anything like that, unfortunately. But it's a nice process to have. So we're going to repeat it in Arabic and everyone follows it. Then we're going to look at the translation. And we're going to look at the hadith, and we're going to try to give the general meaning of what this hadith is trying to tell us. Then we're going to try and take as many lessons as we can from this hadith and see how we can apply them in our life. That's generally the extent to which we're going to get into. Why do I define this? Because in the field of Islamic law, the hadith generally ends up talking about differences of opinion and different approaches and what scholars said about it, or going into the specific Arabic words and what this Arabic word means in detail and how it's been understood by different scholars and what are the shades of meaning. We're generally not going to get into that much detail because we have to cover more. So hopefully that's clear from the get-go. Any questions on methodology? No. So fabrication is like out there. Weakness is weakness. There's a level range of weakness that a hadith can have. Fabrication means it's so weak that we shouldn't even give it precedence. We shouldn't give it any credence at all. In fact, most scholars, they say that fabricated hadith is not actually hadith. So you don't even use the word hadith for it. There's weak hadith and then there's fabricated statements. They're not even attributed closely to the Prophet at all. Huh? Any other question? Yeah. For the sake of knowledge, you mean? The one about seeking knowledge in China? Oh. You know, that hadith is correct, but it's saying that this is a superstition that the Arabs believed in, and they shouldn't believe it because it's not true. That's what it was. So the hadith is saying this is not true. If you see an owl, the owl does not have a murdered spirit body until it's being venged. That's not true. So that's the hadith. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so references, the key. So what you're going to find is in the text that you have with you, there's going to be a key explaining to you where this hadith is coming from. So you can kind of reference it, you understand where it's coming from. B is for Bukhari. Imam Bukhari, we explained, he's got one of the books, probably one of the most revered books in Islamic civilization in the field of hadith. We have Muslim, another one which is considered highly authentic, one of the most authentic ones as well that we have. We have Tirmidhi, another author, wrote another book. Abu Dawood, so AD stands for Abu Dawood, name of the guy. Nasa'i, another one. Ibn Majah, Ibn Hibban, most people don't know about this, but it's called Sahih Ibn Hibban, very highly authentic hadith. ML for Malik, Imam Malik's book Muwatta, very early book of hadith. Now here's the criteria. So what you'll find is we put an S with a dot underneath it, which stands for a Sad. Okay, this is Sahih. When you see an S, with the dot underneath it, under a thing, it means it's rigorously authenticated. This is the highest authentication criteria that you'll find, generally across the board. Is there anything more authentic than Sahih? Yes, there is. There's something called mutawatir. There's one standard, but there's very few hadith that reach that level. But there is something called Sahih, which means that it's rigorously authenticated. It's something that you can be quite clear that you should be able to go ahead and accept this. It's fine. Whether you understood it correctly and you put it in context and all that, that's another issue. Then you have something called Hasan. Hasan literally means good. Or you can call it sufficiently authentic. Right? It's something that is just a little bit lower than Sahih, but it's still considered to be very highly authentic, and it's perfectly fine for people to go ahead and accept that there's nothing wrong with it. Then you have HS, which stands for Hasan Sahih, which means, there's different theories of what it means, but generally it means something between the two. And only person who really used this among our sources is Imam at-Tirmidhi. So the reason why I mentioned this in the text is so that you understand what did the actual Imam himself grade his own hadith. Some of these scholars graded their own hadith, some of them didn't grade them and they just put them there. They knew in their minds what the grading was, but they decided not to publish their grading. So sometimes you'll find that it's been graded by another scholar rather than the scholar himself, because he himself did not explain what his grading was, or he didn't clarify what it was. Okay? The note to understand is that any hadith mentioned in Bukhari or Muslim are automatically considered S for Sahih, because all of them have been authenticated to that standard, and that's the standard that they set for themselves. and most scholars agree that that standard is fine, so you don't need to indicate it. So if you don't find a grading classification there, understand the reason behind it. Okay? So basically, what have we talked about? And any questions on that slide? Yeah. Da'if is something which is not sahih or not hasan. It is neither rigorously authenticated nor is it sufficiently authenticated. Da'if actually means weak. The wording actually means weak. So there's 4 categories of hadith. If you wanted to summarize, there's authentic, there's hasan, which is sufficiently authentic, there's da'if, which means there's a weakness, and there's a range of weakness. It could be a little weak, medium weak, very weak, and if it goes beyond the weakness, it's fabricated. It's like all the way out there. It's another category by itself. It means there's a doubt that it's really a statement from the Prophet, or it's really traced back to the Prophet, that this is his description or something like that. So we have to be careful of these in certain things. Yeah. In Muslim, the same hadith in Muslim. Yes, you will find that the same hadith is spread across different books. So they're not all independent, individual, unique hadith. You'll find that one is in Bukhari and the same one is in Muslim. And the same one may be in Ibn Majah, for example. You will find that. Yeah, so there's duplication as well. Yes. Okay, do you ever find the same hadith in 2 different books that have 2 different gradings? You will find a different scholar grading the same hadith as having some variation. So one scholar may have graded this to be authentic. One scholar may have said, no, it's got a little weakness in it. But generally, you won't find like one guy going, this is highly authenticated, and one guy going, no, this is completely fabricated. It's not like that. There is some range. There's some range, and they generally fall around there. So you will find that as well. But do they live in different times? No, Imam Muslim was actually a student of Imam Bukhari. Yeah. So when we go through the next class, we'll actually go through their detailed lives, when they lived, why they compiled things, how many numbers of hadith, all of that stuff, which will be in the next year class in detail. But right now we want to focus on the prophetic wisdom, the actual what the Prophet said, rather than how the history and how it all was formulated, which is important. But I think learning the teachings are more important first. Yeah. Okay, all terms now. Muttafaqun alayh means it's in Bukhari and Muslim. They both put it in their book. That's what it means. Muttafaqun alayh, agreed upon. Okay. Yes. Not in this class. The definition of it, you mean? Yeah, no, not in this class. That's going to be in the next class. The other class on hadith will be about how it's categorized, what are the different, classifications, all of that stuff. How hadith originated, how we know that what reached us is authentic, when it was actually codified, the response to Orientalists who say that hadith started in the 200 years or 100 years after the Prophet, or whether it's really been written, whether we have original writings. All of that's going to be covered in the next class. This is going to focus primarily on what the Prophet said and what we can learn from it, inshallah. Iqra, right? Yeah, okay. Well, it's not really related to the topic, but since we have a little bit of time, Iqra can mean read or can mean recite. So there was not necessarily an actual book that was there. So he was illiterate, and it's quite clear in the Quran that he's a Nabi al-Ummi. He's the illiterate prophet. Until he died, there are a few scholars. A few scholars said that near the end of his life, he was able to read a few things. Imam al-Baji, among the Malikis in Spain, he was one of the people who wrote a book, who said that, my theory is that the Prophet ﷺ, he learned to read a little bit near the end of his life. But throughout most of his life, he was illiterate. That's 100% for sure. Almost everyone also agrees that throughout his life, he was illiterate. Because there was no need for him to read. Because he's getting revelation. So a lot of people try to, try to insist that we must believe that he was reading. Why? Because either they want to establish a theory that he copied from the Bible and the Torah, or the ideas that he got. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is, no, he must have got his wisdom and he must have learned all these things from, studying different books or whatever it is. Even if he was able to read, we're not talking about reading it. We're not talking about he didn't have a library. It was not like spending a few hours every day in the library of Alexandria to come up with the thoughts that were coming in the Quran. People are so impressed with how amazing the Quran is. They say there's no way he could have gotten this, so he must have been studying with somebody. But that's not the case. There's really not much basis for that. That's just the motive that a lot of people have to try and push this theory that he must have been literate. Yes. Yes, we're going to deal with all the logistics of the class right after the review, inshallah. Okay, so we've talked about prophetic teachings. We've explained what that means. We talked about introduction to hadith, what the term means, all of those things. We talked about the dangers in quoting hadith. And that's actually very important to know from the get-go, so you understand, and you're a little bit more critical at the type of things you hear and who you're hearing and what context you're hearing from them and all of that stuff. And this is really important to know, and it's probably potential, very good potential for being one of your essay questions. It's a hint. All right? And then there's methodology of selection, the methodology that we used in order to determine what kind of hadith we're going to start with. It's not about limiting yourself, it's about where you're starting with. Right? We can only start with, if there's like 10,000 hadith that you decided to study, and there's more than 10,000 by the way, you have to start with something, right? So you have to pick something. So I'm going to start with this because this is more important for me at my point in time. If you're someone who's, well, let's leave that example. All right, so methodology of selection is important. Okay, so that's it. Now I'm going to show you. So this was probably the shortest introduction. It's going to be a lot more detailed afterwards. I'm going to show you what Canvas is. For those of you who already are registered and you're paid, and you're in another class and you already know how Canvas works, you can leave, but please very quietly while I'm explaining what Canvas is.